Condemned Criminal Origins is far from the best game. I mean, hell, Monolith's 2005 outing into the first-person action horror realm doesn't even come close to the quality of their previous title in the same genre, Fear. In almost every single way, Condemned stumbles and flumbles where Fear manages to sprint. Fear's got great atmosphere, combat, pacing, it has a relatively coherent story, it has characters that react to the world around them in believable ways, and it even has some pretty good scares. Fear is a game that tops the charts when it comes to the action horror genre, even today. So it makes it really disappointing to see the same studio follow it up with the game that feels so stuck in the tropes and design philosophies of its era. Constant objective pop-ups, health packs everywhere, and even a growing presence of guns in a game based primarily around melee combat. When you take a step back and you look at all the other games that came out the same year as Condemned, like, Cabela's Dangerous Hunts 2.
This here's bear country.
It's not surprising that so few people look back at Condemned with any sort of reverence beyond, oh yeah, hey, it did a couple of things pretty cool. Before recently, I'd never actually gotten to play Condemned. Like I said, there were too many other, more interesting games releasing around that time, like Cabela's Alaskan Adventures the following year. It's a game I'd always been curious about, so when I was wandering my local old stuff store and I saw a copy of it on the shelf, I decided I'd go ahead and play it. After all, it is the season for spooky stuff. And here's where I get to say that nothing I'd heard about this game lived up to my expectations. The part where mannequins move behind your back, it was like 10 seconds. The combat, it was okay, and what story? But the one thing I haven't been able to stop thinking about isn't how this game's aged, or hasn't, depending on how you look at it, or how it gives you health kits after every moderately challenging encounter, completely removing the weight from any bit of combat, or even how the boss fights that exist in this game are complete garbage. No, I've been thinking about Condemned's setting more than anything else this last month. Now, when I say I'm talking about Condemned setting, I don't just mean the physical characteristics of the places you go throughout the game. The state of the world beyond just the levels is in question, and the way that characters react to the goings-on in considerably abnormal ways just adds to how strange it all feels. It ends up giving the levels, and even the story, more flavor than they might have meant to. The majority of levels are set in Metro City, a rundown burg overflowing with attics, violence, and more abandoned facilities than you can shake a 2x4 at. It's not unusual for horror games, even now, to send you into a dilapidated something or other, because it gives level designers a lot of toys to play with that can contextually feel at home and still be spooky. But in Condemned, pretty much every single place you visit is so incredibly busted that you should probably be more afraid of getting tetanus than getting smacked by a creepy-crawling ghost man. And the story itself is more than a little bit scatterbrained. You never have the full details of what's going on, and that's totally fine, but everything is so disconnected and jump-cutty that it's hard to grasp at any sort of coherence to the plot's events. You learn that violence in Metro City is high and on the rise, but you never learn of anything being done about it, and beyond being told, oh yeah, this is all the fault of a cult, you never actually learn the true nature of what exactly the cult is doing to cause this. Looking at the story from top down, just real quick overview, you get framed for the murder of your partners as you're investigating a serial killer, and as you try to then clear your name, more and more crazy shit gets revealed and happens. You find out that a cult is responsible, like I said, for the high levels of violence that, again, nobody's doing anything about. And then, after a bunch of crap happens, you end up fighting the guy from Hellraiser with a big metal stick. The way that characters, including the protagonist, just accept the horrible things going on in Metro City, and the way government agents are very clearly involved in a conspiracy involving both your character and this freaky cult of metal-faced weirdos, reminds me of Innsmouth and its cursed fish-faced residents. To explain a little bit, Innsmouth is a small fictional town in Massachusetts that serves as a pretty key setting in some of H.P. Lovecraft's writing, and it even serves as some major plot fuel in the primary setting in the also released in 2005 game Call of Cthulhu: Dark Corners of the Earth. In Call, much like in Condemned, you play a detective that gets wrapped up in otherworldly conspiracies and very quickly ends up far out of their own depth. The difference between the two is that where Condemned City and its residents are just kind of accepting of the situation and outright violent towards meddlers and outsiders, Innsmouth's residents are actively working towards strengthening the power of the curse that's on them, and they take on a more secretive, I don't know nothing stance towards strangers. They prefer to work behind the backs of meddlers instead of directly against them. The first real level that you get to walk around in Call of Cthulhu is Innsmouth. You hop off of a bus and you are sort of just set free to try and investigate this mystery that you're investigating. As you're walking around, the residents are gonna stare at you if you get too close, following you with eerie, bulging eyes. They're not gonna answer your questions with anything other than a gurgly, I don't know. And even the constable, a police officer that you find, tells you to get out of town. This small port town is covered in a greenish hue, and there's hardly any ambient sound in this level apart from a creeping musical tune and the occasional sound of somebody banging on a door for no reason. Some of the people will say that they can't be seen talking to you, and it all makes it very clear that something is wrong, and you are probably the only person who cares. Some of those same atmospheric ideas are used in Condemned, but in some different ways. Instead of everything being colored strangely, the environments rely more on actual lighting. There are untrustworthy shadows everywhere, and their use in tandem with pillars, corners, and otherwise claustrophobic areas that break line of sight make you wary of everything you can't see instead of concerned with everything you can. The tension that's made by limiting what you can see gets heightened by Condemned's use of sound. Most levels forego music in favor of ambient noises befitting the environment, allowing the atmosphere to breathe and further develop the tone of whatever scene you're in. Whirring generators in an underground facility, the sound of trains running overhead, and roaring wind and slamming shutters in an abandoned farmhouse. No music, just the noise of your surroundings and the things that go bump in the night. There's one level in particular that I think really nails this, and even raises some questions about the world at large, and that's the early subway level. You start in the subway station itself and eventually make your way into the tracks, maintenance rooms, and tunnels beneath it, where the generators and ne'er-do-wells really live. What's so interesting about this level in particular isn't how dirty it is or how well it plays with lighting and enemy placements, and don't get me wrong, all that is really interesting, but the fact that all the important bits, the train, the platform mechanisms, and whatever else goes on in a train station to actually make it work, the fact that all that is still in good condition enough for it to actually function is pretty fucking weird, right? I mean, this means that despite how neglected and full of hyper-violent baddies this subway station is, despite how that's true for everywhere else you go in Condemned, there's still at least a modicum of management and maintenance for these modern facilities. People still ride the train, and somebody keeps them in working order and even handles schedules. There's even an announcement that comes over a PA to tell you that the train is going to run on time today. This could totally just be hand-wavy writing to keep the player from digging too deep into why they're able to take a train out of a seemingly neglected station, but all it's made me do is further question the state of Metro City and its residents. Are these people really just okay with how things are? Is some poor city employee really tasked with coming down here and making sure everything's in working order? It's insane, and it further lends credence to the idea that something greater is at work here. Like in Innsmouth, the people in charge and even some of the residents are all implicitly involved in some sort of conspiracy to destroy this city, summon some otherworldly horror, or maintain the shitty status quo of just letting things fall further and further into chaos. It's really easy to look at this at surface level and just see a game that hand-waves some of the more extended logic related to its setting in favor of having interesting locales with spooky atmosphere. But when you take into account Condemned's larger themes of conspiracy, otherworldly horror, and manipulation of the masses, you start to see a more interesting picture painted of Metro City and its inhabitants. Whether intentional or not, by providing very little information outside of the minimum of what's needed to frame the story and motivate the player to proceed, Condemned ends up bringing to mind questions about the greater state of the world at large, and it ends up creating a setting that is very much a paranormal apocalypse. While this world building could very much just be an accident, I think that there's plenty to learn from how it ends up working out. After all, Metro City is the most memorable thing about Condemned.